Okay, everybody. So I'm very excited for tonight. We're going to be talking about the holiday of Chanukah. I'm sure everyone's very excited for Chanukah. So a lot of times what I found with Chanukah is so many of the basics we learn while we're little kids. So a lot of times the story of Chanukah and the ideas behind Chanukah we retain sort of our childish understanding of them. You know, my children, they come home and they're very excited. They're singing their Chanukah songs, and it's so adorable. And I ask myself, I'm like, well, okay, this is how they're experiencing Chanukah, and they're 6 years old and 3 years old. Like, hopefully me, as their father, I have a little more of a depth and appreciation for the special holiday of Chanukah, and I'm not sort of stuck in that childish understanding. So hopefully tonight I'll be able to give over a little bit of that. I'm sure you guys know a lot about this, but just maybe to expand on some of the ideas. So Chanukah happened during the period of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. The Greeks were during that time period occupying the land of Israel. And as everyone knows, they started imposing certain decrees regarding the Jewish religion. Namely, that Jews would not be allowed to observe the Sabbath, Shabbos, would not be able to observe Rosh Chodesh, meaning sanctifying the new month, and also that Jews would not be able to observe Bris Milah, the circumcision. So those were the 3 decrees on the Jewish religion. In addition to the decrees on Jewish religion, they also affected Jewish life in many other ways as well, some actually very disturbing ways, one of which is that there was a rule that the governor of the land of Israel, whoever that was at various times, he would have basically first rights when it came to the night of a marriage between a young Jewish couple. He would force himself upon the woman. So these were some of the disturbing decrees that the Greeks made on the Jewish people during this time period. Now, my focus is going to be really on how Chazal, the sages in the Talmud, present the story, and also how they present the story in our liturgy. So the main place in the Talmud that the Chanukah story and observance occurs is actually in tractate Shabbos. And the Gemara over there asks a very obvious question. My Chanukah, what is Chanukah? It's a good question. So the Talmud responds with a teaching of the sages. And it says the following. It says on the 25th of Kislev, which is we know when Chanukah begins, that's when Chanukah is. It's 8 days. You can't say hesped, you can't say eulogies during the time of Chanukah. V'delo lehis anos, and also you're not allowed to fast during the days of Chanukah. Why? So now the Talmud proceeds to tell the story. Shekisha nichnasu yavonim leheichal timu kol hashemanim. When the Greeks, they entered into the temple, they ritually impurified all of the oils. And when the Jewish kingdom, the Beis Hashmonai, the Hasmoneans, that dynasty, the Maccabees, when they strengthened themselves in war, v'nitzcham, and they beat the Greeks, bitku v'lo matzu, ela pach echad shel shemen, they were only able to find one little jug of oil. Shahaya Munach B'tchuma Shel Kohen Gadol, which had the kosher stamp of the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. That was the only thing that they were able to find. Just one pach shem, one flask of oil. And it was important that the flask of oil they used for the mitzvah of lighting the menorah in the temple have the stamp of the high priest. Otherwise, there was no assurance that it would meet the prerequisites of ritual purity. And as we all know, it only had enough oil in it to light one day. And nasa bones, but a miracle happened. And it lit for 8 days. The Shana Acheres, in another year, the sages enacted a festival of praise and thanksgiving for this miracle that occurred during this time period. So this is how the Talmud addresses the miracle of Chanukah. There was barely any mention of the war and a very large emphasis on the miracle that occurred with the oil. Now, we all say during the prayer, during both the Amidah, the Shemona Esrei prayer, as well as during Birkat Hamazon, the grace after meals, there's a special insertion called Al Hanisim, about the miracles. We say it both during Chanukah and during Purim. It's a special prayer insertion that we have in our liturgy. And if a person, actually forgot to bring a siddur, I should have brought one, but if a person reads the text of this prayer, they'll notice that the vast majority of that text actually deals with the war between the Jewish people and the Greeks. So the Maharal, he asks a question. How are you supposed to understand this? Why in one place is the emphasis on the miracle of the oil, and yet in another place, the emphasis is on the miracle of war? So he answers and says the following. He says the miracle of war, the miracle that the Jewish people were able to overcome a much stronger world power, the Greek army, the most powerful army in the world, you could have perhaps explained that naturally. Even nowadays, a lot of times when we see these great military victories that the state of Israel wins, meaning how 1967, even what we're currently witnessing, a lot of people try to sort of explain these things away. Oh, they just have superior military, superior technology, America's backing them, all of these things, which may be true. We know, however, that if surely there's a miracle going on, the dominance that Israel seems to have is surely above nature. Yet, it's oftentimes very easy to fall into the trap of thinking, maybe it's not really a miracle. There's really a natural explanation. So you could have thought the same thing during the miracle of Chanukah, during the miracle of the Jewish people rising up against the Greeks. But of course, Hashem didn't want us to think that. Therefore, coming off the miracle of the war against the Greeks, Hashem made another miracle happen, that this oil should last, instead of just one day, 8 whole days. And through that, we'd recognize that the entire story from the beginning of the war was also something above nature. That's the first, perhaps, idea I wanted to share. So next is also a very a deeper concept that I wanted to explain that has to do with the structure of the temple in Jerusalem. Now, Chanukah, one of the unique things about Chanukah is that when Chanukah was created, it was already way after the period of prophecy was over. Prophecy existed amongst the Jewish people throughout the entirety of the first temple, even through the exile we went through in Babylon, when the story of Megillas Esther took place. So even during Megillas Esther, there was still such a concept of prophecy. The prophecies of Sefer Daniel, those all took place during that period of the Babylonian exile. So even the story of Esther, the Megillas Esther, and the subsequent setting up of that holiday of Purim, all took place within the historical context of prophecy. Chanukah already occurred a few hundred years later, during the time period of the Second Temple. In the Second Temple, as you may all know, there was much less explicit revelations of miracles and divine revelation in the temple. It was not as miraculous of an existence as was the First Temple. Now, what this basically teaches us is, whereas prior to this time period in history, the emphasis was on the written Torah, the move from prophecy to, let's say, the Chachamim, the wise men, the sages of the Talmud, during that period, the emphasis moved from prophecy to Chachma. Prophecy is divinely revealed wisdom in a very explicit way, whereas Chachma, wisdom, is something that a person attains through their own efforts, perhaps also with divine assistance, but by and large through his efforts at getting involved in whatever topic he's learning about. Now, this is hinted a little bit in the structure of the temple. The temple had, the main feature of the temple was actually the Aron, the ark. Inside of the ark was the tablet containing the Ten Commandments. This was the main source in the world for the Kedusha of Torah and represented the written Torah. The ark was located in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies, the most restricted area of the temple. In the Holy of Holies, the only time someone would enter into the Holy of Holies was once a year, during Yom Kippur, and only one person, the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. Only during Yom Kippur could the Kohen Gadol enter into the Holy of Holies, the Kodesh Kadoshim. The menorah, on the other hand, was outside of the Holy of Holies. It was accessible by even the average Kohen every day of the year. In fact, Jewish law states that anyone was able to light the menorah, even a non-Kohen. He couldn't enter into the Heichal, the temple building, but he could light it outside of the Heichal, and they could bring it in to the Heichal. Again, there's two parts of the temple building, just for context. There's the Heichal is like the whole building, and it had an outer room, and the inner room was the Holy of Holies. The outer room is known as just the Heichal. So that's where the menorah rested, and even a non-Kohen was able to light the menorah. Now, the lesson for us is the metaphor, perhaps, that we can glean from the setup of the temple in this way, is that when it comes to the written law, the written Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the subsequent prophecies and writings, those we don't really have any access to those teachings in the sense that we can be influential in their creative process. Meaning, the Torah was given, and we sort of accept it. It's very one-sided. And that's how it should be. We accept the Torah as it was given, and it's for us to try to learn and try to understand, but ultimately, we don't have any creative input into the Torah. Now, when it comes, so that's represented by the Aron, and with the Aron, is the tablets containing the Ten Commandments. That represents the written Torah, and to show that this is very much a one-sided, in the sense that Hashem gives it to us and we accept it. It's not a give and take, we accept it. That's why it's in the Kodesh HaKodashim. It's only accessible on one day of a year, only for the high priest. That's the Aron, that's the ark. However, the menorah, which again represents Chanukah and the menorah, in the way it was set up in the Mikdash, was only in the Heichal. It wasn't off limits. It was a place that Kohanim could go any time of year. And even a non-Kohen could light it. So that represents, on the other side, the oral Torah. The oral Torah, in a certain way, the keys to the oral Torah were given over to the sages. And a person who studies the Torah and puts in effort to come to the correct understanding and ensures that his methods are in line with the Masorah, right? We have the 13 exegetical principles. When a person plays by those rules and he comes out with correct understanding, he is taking part. It's a give and take in the process of understanding Torah. That's using those tools, we can have modern day halachic deciders they can use the Talmud, using their understanding of the Talmud, be able to paskin and define very new technologies, electricity, new medical breakthroughs, all of these different things. As soon as they come up, a chacham, a sage, can fit it in to the constructs of the Talmud. Of course, there's a tradition and a Masorah that a person has to keep to, but since the oral Torah was given over to the Chachamim, to the sages, to the people who learn the Torah, to have a give and take, and it was given over to human logic, in a sense, I'm putting a caveat on that. Therefore, we can be part of the process of the revelation of the oral Torah. Of course, the oral Torah was given at Sinai too. That's true. But its application in our lives, that's, in a certain sense, I'm putting a caveat on this, is in a certain sense subject to the understanding of Chazal, of the sages. Not to say that they can make things up. It's not. It's all coming from the processes they were given and passed down through tradition. I want to be very clear. It doesn't mean that they're making things up, and it doesn't mean that the rabbis can just decide whatever they want. What it means is that there's a relationship between the oral Torah and the logic that Hashem bestows on a person. That's I guess the best way to say it. If anything about this is confusing, please ask me, because I don't want anything to be too vague with respect to these ideas. So those are the two periods in Jewish history. There's the periods of Nevuah relating to the written Torah, and the period of Chachma relating to the wisdom of the Torah, where the sages could become part of the revelation of the Torah. And what's important to point out from this is that when a person lives with the Torah, lives his life according to the divine command of the Torah and learns it within the tradition that we've received, he becomes a conduit for the divine will to come into the world. And that's why the Torah is so significant. Now, I said earlier that the first temple was on a much higher level. There was much more revelation of God during the first temple than during the second temple. I'd like to present a statement that actually comes from the sages that is a very surprising statement. It says the following. It says that even though the first temple had a much higher level of holiness, nevertheless, the main part of the Torah, its beauty, its glow, its shine, was only during the second temple. Since they didn't want to build, when they were deciding to build the second temple, they didn't want to build the second temple until Hashem gave a promise that he would be willing to reveal the secrets of the Torah during the time of the second temple. This is very surprising. The implication of this chazal is that only during the second temple were many of the divine secrets revealed to our Chachamim. And that's really why, in a certain sense, many of the secrets of the Torah that come from the sages like Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, those all happened not during the first temple period, actually after the second temple period. The second temple period sort of ushered in the era of the sages being able to perfect their wisdom and being meriting to divine assistance in their studies and able to reveal many secrets of the Torah which weren't accessible until then. That was the second idea that I wanted to bring out about sort of the period that the Chanukah story took place in, and how the dichotomy between prophecy and Chachma. And within this time of Chachma, when Chachma was being more revealed into the world, like I said, it corresponds in a way to the Greeks, meaning one on the side of holiness, the other on the side of unholiness. What do I mean? So last week we actually had a shir about the sage Reish Lakish. Now Reish Lakish said a very interesting thing. In the beginning of Bereshis, it talks about there's 4 terms used to express tohu vavohu v'choshech al panei tehom. Those terminologies, the desolation that existed prior to creation, how it was formless, it was void, it was dark. There are 4 words that it uses there. One of the words, like I said, is choshech, darkness. Reish Lakish, he learns that verse, that each of those terminologies is referring to one of the kingdoms that oppressed the Jewish people. Mitzrayim, Bavel, the Babylonians, and the Greeks, and also the Romans. So one of the ones, choshech, says Reish Lakish, darkness, corresponds to the Greeks, interestingly enough. Which, if anyone's into history, may seem a little bit ironic. As we know, the Greeks were perhaps the most progressive in terms of societal achievement, democratic achievement, political achievement, achievement in the arts, achievement in the sciences. They were perhaps more modernized than the rest of world history, and really ushered in, I guess, the great progress of the Romans and It was really a glory, in a certain way, a glory, part of the glory days of world history of the Greek Empire, which seems to not fit with Reish Lakish's interpretation of the verse in Genesis and Bereshis, which says that they're actually called chayshech. We would think that because of their intellectual achievements, they're the opposite of chayshech. They should be considered light. Now, it starts to make sense, first of all, on a simple level, when you think of how the Greeks tried to oppress the Jewish people on a simple level. But if we take it a step further and we understand and we see the dichotomy between what's considered Jewish wisdom and what's considered Greek wisdom, then we can start understanding why, in comparison to Jewish wisdom, the Greek wisdom is considered chayshech. So what do I mean? If we would classify the two wisdoms, we'd actually have to go back to understanding the difference between two of Noach's sons. Noach actually had 3 sons. One of Noach's sons was named Shem, and another one of his sons was named Yafes, which sort of translates as beauty. Now, at a certain point, not to go into the whole story, Noach gives a blessing to 2 of these sons. Yafes, he says, should be very beautiful, whereas Shem, he says, should have tents and is going to be more studious and involved in, perhaps we could call it divine wisdom. Now, these 2 sons grew up to be the forebearer of 2 different nations. Shem became the ancestor of Abraham, of Avram Avinu, and Yafes became the ancestor of the Greeks, of Yavon. Now, the emphasis in Greek culture was on aesthetics, on beauty. What was beautiful and gave pleasure to a person was considered the most important thing. In comparison, Jewish wisdom, the emphasis is on purpose, on connecting to the transcendent purpose of creation. Whereas Jewish wisdom, the emphasis is on what is my place? How can I fulfill my role in reality? Greek wisdom asks, how can I get the most pleasure from this world? What can the world do for me and my senses? Whereas Greek wisdom corresponded to the darkness of the body and its appetites and its pleasures that it seeks, Jewish wisdom corresponds to the soul. Jewish wisdom is God consciousness, and Greek wisdom is the opposite, is physicality. As much as Greek wisdom may have contributed to scientific advancements, in the realm of morality, it may have led to the opposite, to many steps back, as we're seeing many of the most advanced societies in terms of science actually became the most depraved in terms of morality. So that is why we refer to the Greeks, why Reish Lakish referred to the Greeks as corresponding to darkness, to chayshech. Now, that was part 1 of this year. I'm not going to be so much longer, but I did just want to get in another part of this year, which is, since Chanukah is coming up, I wanted to maybe give a little bit of I don't know what to call it, but a primer, maybe an introduction to the mitzvah of lighting the Chanukah menorah. Our sages reveal some of the kavanas, the intentions a person is supposed to have when they light. And these intentions that they reveal to us can actually serve as meditations for us to focus on while we perform these special mitzvahs. So I want to go through maybe a couple of them, and there's something that you guys can use while you're actually lighting the Chanukah menorah. They'll enhance your personal connection to the mitzvah, and they'll actually also enhance the quality of the mitzvah. So the first part of the Chanukah of lighting the Chanukah menorah is putting the oil into the cups. I know some people might use wax. That's okay. You can put the wax when you're putting the wax in. You can think of this. Ideally, actually, the highest level mitzvah is to actually use oil. And our rabbis teach us that the shemen, the oil, represents a person's mind. So as a person is pouring in the pure oil into their cups, a person can think that they want to light up their mind with thoughts, with memory. Basically, a person should remember that there's such a concept called olam haba, a world to come, and that there's such a concept called of olamos elyonim, of upper worlds, that our actions correspond to. There's a whole spiritual world we don't see, and when a person pours in the oil, which represents our mind, we should use our mind to contemplate these spiritual mysteries, these spiritual concepts. Another idea also for connecting our mind to the mitzvah is perhaps to maybe before one comes to do the mitzvah, to study a statement, a phrase, a passage from a tzaddik, of a special rabbi, and to think about that as they're pouring the oil in. Again, it's a very special time to connect our mind to divinity. In particular, the ideas that we should connect ourselves to should be simple ideas. Next, the next stage that we'll get into in the mitzvah is when we say the blessings. Now, there's 3 blessings. I'll go through each one. The first blessing is that we say lahadlik ner shel Chanukah. Now, there's different girsas of the blessing. One of the girsas of the blessing is lahadlik ner Chanukah. They leave out the shell. And that's actually the girsa, that's the addition that the Sephardic Jews have. Now, the Roshei Tevos of lahadlik ner Chanukah spells out the word nachal, which means a river. So as a person is saying this bracha of lahadlik ner shel Chanukah, they should think that just as a river flows without anything stopping it, and it just keeps going, it's an endless stream of water, so too, that should be the relationship between a person and their Torah. As a person lights the Chanukah menorah, it's a very special time to think about the desires they have within the realm of divine service. A person can think about how they want to improve in a certain negative trait, about how they want to improve in certain mitzvah observances, how they want to improve perhaps in a particular relationship. So during the time they're preparing to light the menorah, they should be thinking about those desires they have within divine service, and perhaps even to say a prayer for those things. Now, when we're actually lighting the menorah, I said I would go through the rest of the bracha. So the next bracha we say is Sha'asa Nisim Lavaseinu Bayamim Ha'im Bazman Hazeh. So we should think, as we're saying, Hashem, who did miracles for our ancestors then, and also does miracles for us now, that we're actually living through a time of miracles. Perhaps even now more than ever, and we've seen all the miracles lately we've witnessed during Israel's latest war, we should realize that just as God did miracles then, he also does miracles for us now. And we should perhaps feel gratitude for those miracles that he performs now. The last bracha we say is a shehechianu. And for me, this is always my favorite bracha, because I always feel such a happiness that I merited to get to another Chanukah because of all the spiritual potential that is in Chanukah. So when we say the shehechianu, we should feel very, very happy that we merited to reach another Chanukah. There's many people who didn't. There's many people who aren't here to experience another Chanukah. There's many people who don't know about Chanukah. So we should feel thankful as we say the shehechianu, that Hashem kept us alive and brought us to reach this day. So now during the actual lighting, we're actually lighting up each ner, each candle. One of the interesting halachas, ideally a menorah, is supposed to actually be less than 10 tefachim off the ground. Now, since we light in our houses nowadays, it may not be applicable. You can ask a rabbi for more details on these topics. But ideally, a menorah is actually supposed to be underneath 10 tefachim, which is about 3 or 4 feet. And this represents to us that the menorah, and I should say on the counter side, it's actually a problem for your menorah to be too high up. Let's say a person lives on the 10th floor. I actually lived on the 5th floor. There's a problem. To light too high up, over 20 almost tall, that's too high. You're not allowed to light too high. And the reason for this, from a spiritual perspective, is that we want to show when we're lighting the menorah that God's light can come all the way down to the lowest part of creation. So when a person's lighting the menorah, what they should have in mind is that they're bringing Hashem's light into all aspects of their life, particularly any challenges that they're going through. If a person has any challenges, any difficulties going on, sorrows, yisurim, different things that a person might have that are challenging them, and it's very hard to see Hashem's light in that, the menorah, since we light it close to the ground, is supposed to be for us, is an opportunity for us to bring God's light into the lower aspects, the difficult parts of our life. So these are some of the things we can think about during Chanukah. Again, the first part of my share was more about the general history, the general concepts of Chanukah, Jewish wisdom versus Greek wisdom, the wisdom of the sages versus the revelations of prophecy. And the second part of this year, we discussed some of the thoughts that a person should have throughout the lighting of the Chanukah menorah. And hopefully with all of these things in mind, we can make our Chanukah a very meaningful spiritual experience, and it should be a jumping off point for our relationship with Hashem. And we should all have a very happy Chanukah, and it should be happy for the entirety of the Jewish people. And I wish everyone happiness and health.